We have one final presenter. It's Seth Persigal. He's going to be talking about his DNA viewer. So, give a round of applause for Seth.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Seth Persigal. I'll be talking about a virtual molecule viewer that I worked on in collaboration with a group from MIT. They had recently a hackathon focused specifically on VR. So it's the largest hackathon that's been done in America yet. They had over 300 people in attendance in many different teams and many different subject areas, not just gaming, but in industrial tasks as well. So before I go too far into that, just a little bit about me. I'm a virtual reality engineer for a company out in Chantilly near Dulles Airport called Great Circle Technologies. We focus our VR efforts on data visualization of different types, so social network graphs. Today I'll be talking about DNA. I focus my efforts in Unreal Engine 4 as opposed to Unity. I've dabbled in both, but most of the products we put out are done in Unreal Engine. We've also done a little bit with WebVR, and we did some for the hackathon as well. On the more personal side, I'm a ham radio license holder, so I do all sorts of electronics things, robots, 3D printing, some Python scripting, all of that stuff, and find interesting ways to bring in VR. So that little robot there had ultrasound sensors around it that you could put the data points on the headset, so you actually see, without using a camera feed, how far objects away were from the robot. Moving back to the hackathon itself, it was hosted from October 7th through 10th. The first day was talks, presentations, kind of like here, and then there was a 48-hour competition where teams got together and tried to tackle a problem or create a product or a game. This was unusual, or it had an unusual style in that teams were not formed before the hackathon. Everyone met there. So we had group leads that each had a challenge, and we did pitch sessions and then formed a team around that to try and tackle it. And there were prizes and stuff. We didn't win anything, but we had a good time. So the particular challenge we had was our team lead was a molecular biology PhD student. So he was working in the laboratory and trying to find causes for what causes diseases that are from the genome. So if you think like cancers or some portions of obesity, different things that happen or get deformed in your DNA that can trigger these things. The specific challenge we needed to focus on was that visualizing all of this data from their laboratory equipment is difficult. There wasn't a lot of good ways to view this 3D structure that is your DNA and how all of its bends and folds actually has meaning, not just the sequence of DNA. And there's not a good way to see it right now. So this is how it's currently done. The sequence as it folds near each other where those magenta lines kind of meet up with each other. And he wanted a better way to look at it. So he spent all of his time and going for his master's and PhD thesis to create a system to allow him to do that. So that's complicated, and I'm not a molecular biologist, and I don't understand most of that. And so I'm going to apologize for any molecular biologists that may be in the room, but I'm just going to skip to the TLDR and say basically your DNA is this little string thing, and it folds in weird ways, right? If it folds in the wrong place, bad things happen, and we need to know and be able to see where those bad things happen. So we built this. So instead of building seeing it as the string, we see it as a 3D representation. So the portions of those nodes that are close to each other mean different things. If you have an orange node close to a magenta node versus a red node, it means different things. And it's all hitting the same database that they're currently using. So their existing tools and existing workflows can still work in VR. We just complement it with an extra way to view it. So here we have one of their scatter plots brought into VR. So it's a 2D panel, but you have the extra benefit of using the Vive controller to be able to walk around the space. So instead of using your mouse and trying to select things in 3D, you can walk around the molecule in VR and aim and point and see what each portion is. And each time you move your hand, it immediately sends a JSON query out to the database and populates it so you can see what's going on. We also took a conventional web interface that they're used to using and used it to have the different traditional workflows along it, and sorry for the screen resolution. But we put the 3D view in the middle and added a web VR button that you can press, and it will pop up with the viewer so you can take your phone, put it in the cardboard viewer, and see it. Then when you're done, take it back out, and you're back to the workflow. See on the computer, is it possible to click the video play button on the right side? Yep. Yay. There we go. So you're able to take your hands and have menus come out and track your hands so that you can move around and just shine a laser pointer at it, and each node you point at will update the display. So it's designed so that it can expand outwards. We focused on individual cells, or individual strands of DNA inside the cell. But the idea is to make it expandable using open source technologies so that you can deploy it at a larger scale and eventually get up to the tissue level. But that's kind of in the future, not where we're at now. We used both Unreal Engine and WebVR, so we could have the cardboard viewer and the cross-platform integration, but also the high-end experience of using the HTC Vive and now Oculus Touch, now that it's available. We had to do a lot of experimenting, and this is stuff I've worked on before the Genome project, but when we started out back in the days of the DK1 and DK2, we didn't have all the motion tracking abilities that we do now. So it was kind of the Wild West of how you interact with these systems. So we started with a literal desktop interface. So having a wooden desk in front of you, you have traditional monitors that display your two-dimensional data to bring them into the world with you, and then your 3D charts that you can see the depth connections with. In addition to experimenting, it's also great to read the material of all the people that came before you. I know it was mentioned earlier, but the VR book by Jason Gerald is a really good read if you're interested in doing stuff in the VR space. I have no affiliation with it, but there's a lot of good material in there. Just basic things like how you move through VR, how to interact with the computer programs in this new medium. So when we first started, just kind of going through the timeline of how we started interacting with VR, we had the joystick and head tracking. And this was a simple system. It had a lot of downsides, but it was very robust in that if you pressed a button on the controller, you knew the computer was going to register that. If you looked at an object and made a selection, the computer was going to register that. It had downsides in that it could be kind of fatiguing to move around a lot and keep your head focused on things, but it also had the benefit of the controller was so stable that if you ran it over with your rolly chair, it was not going to break anything. We eventually moved on to the leap motion before the touch controls were active, because one of the main complaints we had from our customers was that where are my hands? Like I can't interact, I can't touch anything. You hand me this control panel or control pad that works, but you have to kind of explain it. Whereas touching, you just go, I want to look at that thing, and it works. On the downside, it was, at least until Orion came out, pretty low accuracy, so you had fairly wide margins in making selections with it. So pinch gestures, you have to kind of like comically exaggerate so the computer can track it properly. But it does let you do very interesting things. So instead of having a map or a kiosk that you would get information from, you could have things tied to your hands. So if you want a map, you just make a pinch gesture, the map comes out in front of you, you can touch where you want to go, the environment changes around you, and you let go, and you're there. You can also pull information based on where the user is looking. So if you're in a discrete view like application like this one, you can get the compass setting of where the user is facing. So you get the forward vector out of the headset, and then you can overlay that with a compass on the map. And you can see what the user is looking at and make a determination. The user is probably looking at that building. Give me some information about that building. Moving on, we have the HTC Vive. When it came out, the form of locomotion was kind of a point to teleport and then an arc, which is fantastic. It's a huge step up than trying to use an analog joystick to try and move around. It gives you snap, very precise movements, and you know where you're going to end up before you get there. All very important things to help users stay comfortable while they're in VR. We did have some limitations with this for our particular need. In the 3D viewer, we have to be able to move in the z-axis as well as left and right, forward and back. And so I decided to take kind of a variation on this thing. And could I have you hit the play button again, please? Thank you. Use the vector coming out of the touch controller to allow the user to select a place in front of them where they want to go, or up and above. So what this is here is sending a projection of where the user is going to end up, so they know, like in the previous example, where they're going to go, but they have the control of shooting the line out from their hand, and they can slide it forward to pick where they want to end up. When they let go of the button, they can snap right there. Because they were able to see where the user is, where their green outline is going to be, they can make very specific movements to where they want to go. So they know if I want my hand to be right by that portion of the molecule, I just stick my hand out, and when I move my hand there and release, I can see where it's going to be. It took some fine-tuning, but I think it's a reasonable step forward. And all of this software for the genome viewer is open source here on GitHub, so if you want to take a look, you're welcome to. Can't promise you'll enjoy it as much as I do, but it's open source for you to take a look at. As was mentioned before, there's a lot of experimentation going on in VR right now. All of these projects, ideas, are all based on what came before them, and when you're developing in VR, you're going to get things wrong most of the time, but when you get them right, it's pretty fantastic. So these are some of the other projects and precursors and things that I've worked on. Going back to the social network viewers, which we were able to build on for the DNA view visualization. Using point cloud data to kind of see how much data can we pack into the screen, and oh wait, no, that's just a cloud of gray mess. We can't actually see anything or make anything out. So that doesn't work. LiDAR scanning using Tango tablets to kind of map out an environment, so you can do exploring a building or a house or construction site. And then furthering on with more point cloud stuff, trying with emissive textures and things like that, but you get one variable wrong and it's unusable. So it takes a lot of experimenting to find what works. But if you're interested in this sort of thing, I highly recommend picking out some YouTube tutorials. Attending a hackathon, they have various levels of technical skill requirements. But even people who are relatively new are welcome to join. So I really enjoyed it, and I highly recommend it. And with that, I just want to say thank you. Jason.
What was the reaction like when you showed this to them? Do you think this is the kind of thing where people in labs will be using this to view their data relatively soon?
Gotcha. So the question was, what was the reaction to this? Are people going to be using this in the field or in the laboratory? We got basically two reactions. What is that? And wow, that's really cool. We need this. So we talked to a couple people from the NIH, National Institute of Health. They're interested in this, not with our data set, but in a similar tool so that they can start using it. I'm continuing to work with the researchers from MIT because they helped produce it, and they're very interested in using it for their research as well. So the idea is, hopefully, over some more time, it will actually be a useful tool in the lab. And it's already starting to get to that point. But we're still working on the 2D, 3D interaction and growing the interactions with their existing tool set. Yes?
though it has a Unity bias to it, have you looked into the HoloLens for the 3D visualization and advantages and disadvantages?
Yeah, so, yeah, it would be, it's one of the reasons I'm trying to pick Unity back up. Because it's a lot easier to show someone a HoloLens where you say, okay, here's your desk, I'm not taking all of the world away from you, I'm just adding this one particular thing that we want people to look at and share. So yes, absolutely, I do think the HoloLens is going to be a great tool for this sort of thing. We just didn't happen to have access to one for the hackathon ourselves. Yes?
Who won the competition?
It was mostly games that won. So there was an industrial and medical sector. There was a HoloLens group that won a prize using using augmented reality for pharmacists in a hospital, so they can pick out the precise medicines they need. The number of pills would show up in front of them. They can grab it and greatly increase safety. Other than that, it was mostly games and some story applications, which is great. They were all fantastic programs. But ours was a very niche market, admittedly.
How much does the resolution of the headsets matter for displaying this type of information?
It matters in that you have to account for it, like you have to think about it in advance, but it's gotten to the point where you can read text when necessary. You just kind of have to change the font size and be careful with how things run off. So some of the problems we had is that some molecule names are very short and very easy to work with. Other ones are super long chains and they'll run not just off the screen, but off to the end of the room. And you have to come up with a way to work with that. That's where we started using unique identifiers. So you can say, you know, I can't show the full name for it, but here's something you might want to look up later, and let me save that to the web page. So when you take off the headset, it's there waiting for you.
So I see this being a very powerful tool to educate children, and actually beyond that, in transforming education. Do you see sort of technology kind of replacing traditional textbooks and teaching people biology and building from the essential fundamentals up to even complex tasks? And how effective do you see this technology being almost a full-scale educational course into biology and molecular biology?
Yeah, so using this technology for education purposes instead of just research, I think it's a great way to go forward. I don't think it's going to replace traditional classrooms or textbooks or anything, but it is going to be a great complement to it. To be able to read about how your cell works and then just hop in and see it. And there have already been some great applications on the Oculus Store and other websites for going into the human body and exploring it in VR, so taking a ride through a blood vessel and things like that. And I think there's a huge potential for that in education. Yeah.
Do you use the technology a lot for visualizing like overwhelming data, like comparing like different scales? Like right now I'm working on like size of debt video, or like one stack of cash is what the debt was years ago versus what it is today. Do you use it a lot for that, or is it more just for interacting with, for example, like molecules?
Gotcha. So the question was sense of scale and different amounts of information. So in the molecule example, one of the things we did is there's several different layers of detail that the user can look at. So we may not know exactly which GATA pairs are bonded with each other in a sequence, but we may have a different set of a different zoom to the data where we have a better understanding of it. So the user is able to use their hands and squeeze and shrink and grow and jump between the different layers. So definitely scale is incredibly important. And in the big data side of things, the limited resolution of the headset plays a role in that because you can only show so much data. We tend to draw the line at between 500 and 1,000 different chunks of data in front of the user. Any more than that, the system bogs down and it just gets way too cluttered. So it comes down to your algorithms and how you're going to decide what to show. And that's not necessarily just a VR thing, that's a data science thing as well.